The dark space between stars was silent. No planets, no light, just the cold, black sky. In the middle of that space, a large alien fleet floated slowly. Their ships were big, sharp, and full of powerful machines. These aliens, called the Drevians, had come from a far galaxy. They believed humans were weak and easy to defeat. They thought this would be an easy mission. Commander Varric, the leader of the fleet, sat inside the command room. His eyes glowed green, and his face was calm. "We will find Earth soon," he said. "And when we do, we will take it." The Drevians were sure no one knew they were here. They used cloaking systems to hide their ships. No signals, no lights, not even a sound. They believed they were invisible, safe. But suddenly, something strange happened. A low beep echoed through the command room. One of the crew looked at the screen. "Commander," he said slowly, "we are picking up something." Commander Varric turned. "What is it?" "A signal. Very weak, very fast. It is moving near our outer ships." "What kind of signal?" "We don't know. It's not from our systems. It looks human." Commander Varric stood up. "That is impossible. They should not know we are here." More beeps came. More signals appeared on the screen. Each one was small, very short, like a whisper in space. But they were getting closer. "Send scouts to check it," Varric ordered. 3 small alien ships left the fleet and flew toward the signals. The command room went quiet. Everyone waited. The scout ships moved faster, and then, without warning, disappeared. "They are gone," shouted one officer. No signal, no message, nothing. Commander Varric's calm face changed. He was now serious. "Bring the fleet to full alert. Prepare weapons. I want to know what is out there." The alien ships turned on their shields. Lasers and cannons were ready. The Drevians expected a big human army to appear. They believed this was the start of a battle. But still, nothing came. Only more small signals. The crew grew nervous. Whispers spread. "Maybe it's a trap. Maybe the humans are playing with us." One officer asked, "Should we fire at the signals?" Varric said, "No, not yet. Let us wait and watch." Hours passed. The signals continued. Then one alien ship reported a strange problem. "Commander," the voice came through the speaker, "our lights just went off and came back again. Systems are acting strange." Before Varric could respond, another ship reported the same problem. "Our screens are glitching." Engines paused for a few seconds. We do not know why. The problem started to spread, quietly, slowly, and without a clear cause. The commander looked at his officers. "How is this possible? No enemy ships are near us. There is no fire, no attacks." An engineer replied, "It is not damage. It feels like someone is inside our systems." Varric narrowed his eyes. "That is not possible. Our system is protected. Who could do this?" More ships began to show signs of failure. One lost its radar. Another couldn't open its main doors. One ship floated out of formation without control. Varric shouted, "This is not war. This is something else." One brave officer whispered, "Maybe it's a human." Everyone turned to him. He continued, "I read reports. Humans have special scout units. Very small, very smart. They do not attack with power. They attack with fear." Varric laughed. "One human against our fleet. That is not possible." But deep down, even he wasn't sure. The signals kept coming. Closer, quieter, like someone watching, like someone waiting. The command room was now full of tension. No one spoke, no one moved. They just waited for something to happen. Commander Varric stood in the center. His voice was low. "We came here to fight an army. But I think something else is watching us." Outside the ship, the stars looked the same. Calm, silent. But something was there. Something the Drevians couldn't see. A single human scout had entered the fleet's shadow. He had no army, no big weapons, just tools, stealth, and a sharp mind. And he was just getting started. The Drevians waited in silence. No one talked loudly anymore. The command room felt cold. Even though the machines were still working, there was something in the air, something they could not explain. Commander Varric stood still. His eyes followed the blinking lights on the control panels. Every minute, a new signal came and went, like a soft knock on a door. The humans still hadn't shown their faces, but their presence was being felt across the fleet. Then it happened. A strange flicker passed through one of the ship's lights. Not a big one, just a small, quick flash. One officer thought it was nothing. Maybe a glitch. Maybe just bad wiring. But then another flicker came. Then another. This time, more lights across the room blinked together, like a wave passing through the ship. One of the engineers spoke softly. This feels like someone testing us. Like they are seeing how our systems respond. Commander Varric nodded. He had seen this kind of testing before, but never without seeing who was behind it. Just then, a quiet alarm rang on the main screen. A message popped up. It wasn't written in their language. It was human code. A single word flashed again and again. Not alone. Everyone stared at the screen. No one moved. No one spoke. The room was frozen. Who did this? Varric asked. How did they enter our system? An officer answered. There is no sign of physical contact. No ship was close. We scanned everything. Another added. But the code is clear. It's human. Commander Varric paced slowly. We planned for battles. We trained for fights. But this is not battle. This is something else. They are not trying to destroy us. They are studying us. Elsewhere in the fleet, the same message began appearing. One by one, the Drevians found the words glowing on their screens. Even their backup systems, the ones not connected to the main grid, began to show signs of someone watching. The communication lines between ships grew quiet. Captains did not want to share panic. Some tried to joke, to keep the crew calm. Others whispered to their team, warning them to not touch anything unless ordered. Even the smallest mistake now felt dangerous. The crew on one of the ships noticed their navigation maps had changed slightly, only by a few degrees, but enough to cause confusion. The ship had begun to turn, very slowly, and no one had given the order. We're being moved, the pilot said in a shaking voice. Something is inside our controls. Commander Varric was listening to all of it. He could feel the unease spreading. He had commanded many fleets before. He had won many missions, but never had he seen this kind of quiet control. Not a single explosion, not a single shout. Just silence and shadows. He turned to his science officer. Tell me again, how many humans are we facing? The science officer checked the data. Commander, we can't confirm. No large signals. No ships. No fleet. No energy spikes. There is only one small movement, hidden inside an asteroid field. The command room fell even quieter. One human. Varric whispered. We believe so, the officer replied. How is this possible? Another crew member asked. How can one person do this? No one had an answer. Then the lights went out for 3 full seconds. Darkness filled the ship. Every heartbeat was loud. When the lights came back, nothing looked damaged. But something had changed. The crew could feel it. The main screen now showed a new word. Still watching. Commander Varric walked toward the window. He looked out into the empty space, but saw nothing. Still, he felt eyes on him. And somewhere out there, in the cold quiet, a single human scout was smiling. Careful, calm, and already 3 steps ahead. The Drevians were no longer confident. Their strong minds were now filled with quiet fear. The command room felt heavy, like the air itself had grown thick. The screens kept flashing soft warnings. Strange things kept happening, but none of it made sense. One ship's clocks started running slower. Another ship's food systems began giving the wrong rations. One officer's chair kept adjusting itself, even when no one touched it. These were small problems, but together they created something far more dangerous: doubt. Across the fleet, captains were reporting the same feelings. "We are not alone," said one voice over the communication line. "We don't see them, but they are here." Commander Varric sat still, his hands crossed. He was not angry. He was thinking. Deep thinking. He had led many missions, seen many strange planets, but this felt personal. "These are not mistakes," he said calmly. "This is someone showing us what they can do." His second-in-command, a younger officer named Relic, asked quietly, "Do we still believe it's just one human?" Varric didn't answer right away. He turned to his science officer. "Do you have any new data?" "Yes, Commander," she replied. "We checked again. The energy signal is small, focused, and keeps moving. But only one signal." Varric stood up. "Then yes, it's one human. But not just any human. A scout." The word scout spread through the room like a chill. Human scouts were spoken of in reports, but no one had seen one clearly. Some said they were fast like light. Others said they could listen through walls and move without being noticed. They didn't carry big weapons. They didn't need to. They used something far more powerful: understanding. In another part of the fleet, a crew member found something new on their screen. A simple line of text had appeared. "Wrong calculation. This is not your space." The officer called the captain. The words were clear, calm, and direct. Not a threat, not a request, just a quiet correction. When the message disappeared, the ship's route had changed. Their direction now pointed back to where they came from, as if the scout was offering them a chance to leave. But the Drevians were not ready to give up. Not yet. Commander Varric called a meeting with the leaders of each ship. A soft blue light filled the communication room as the captains appeared one by one. Their faces showed stress. Some looked tired. Some looked lost. "We are being tested," Varric said to all of them. "Not with fire, not with machines, with patience, skill, and silence. A single human is showing us the limits of our own systems." One captain said, "We didn't come here to be watched like this. We came ready to act, to lead." Varric nodded. "Yes, but now we are learning. This scout is not trying to end us. Not yet. They are trying to teach us something." Another voice asked, "Teach us what?" Varric answered, "To respect their ways. To understand their strength is not only in numbers, but in thinking." The meeting ended. No one argued. No one raised their voice. Back in the command room, one of the crew members whispered, "Commander, what if this is not the scout's full power? What if this is only the beginning?" Varric didn't look away from the screen. "Then we must be very careful with our next move." Meanwhile, far away from the center of the fleet, inside a dark and empty piece of floating rock, the human scout sat quietly. His fingers moved quickly over a smooth tablet. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He watched, listened, and waited. Every signal, every reaction, every choice the aliens made, he recorded it all. He had entered the Drevians' world not with noise, but with calm. He had no interest in causing harm. His mission was simple: understand and report. But even simple missions could become something bigger. The scout blinked, and new data appeared. One of the Drevians had tried to shut down their main system. It failed. He leaned back, thoughtful. "They're learning," he whispered to himself. He placed his hand over a small button, but didn't press it yet. First, he would see how far they would go. Because for now, it was still only a game of quiet minds. The human scout remained in silence. His eyes followed the movements of the Drevian fleet on a dark, glowing map. He didn't need to touch anything anymore. The systems around him worked on their own now. They had learned his patterns, his choices, and even his pauses. Outside his hidden place, space looked peaceful. But inside the Drevian ships, peace was slowly turning into pressure. On the main Drevian ship, the crew was no longer asking what happened. Now, they were asking what comes next. Commander Varric stood at the center of the control deck. His team had become quiet, not out of fear, but out of deep thought. The messages, the signals, the soft changes in the system, they were all pointing to something. But what? Have we received any new signs from the human? Varric asked. Yes, Commander, replied the officer. But this time, it's different. A new message had appeared on their communication panel. It said, "This is only one eye." The room paused. What does it mean? Relic asked. No one answered. The words didn't make sense at first, but slowly some of them began to understand. This might not be about strength, Varric said, thinking aloud. It might be about observation, about seeing more than we do. All across the fleet, similar messages appeared. Not warnings, not commands, just quiet ideas. You study stars. I study choices. I was here before you arrived. Not everything big is strong. Not everything small is weak. One by one, the Drevian officers began saving the messages, trying to understand them. Some even began to see patterns, hidden meanings inside the simple words. It was no longer a question of who the scout was. Now the question had become, why is he doing this? Meanwhile, the scout listened to the quiet replies of the Drevian fleet. They didn't know he could hear them. He wasn't tapping into their voices. He was reading the pauses between their thoughts, the space between their decisions. He smiled softly, not because he had won anything, but because something important was happening. They were beginning to think like humans, carefully, strategically, with emotion, but also with logic. And yet, he knew time was short. Sooner or later, someone would make a bigger move. Back on the Drevian lead ship, Varric received an alert. One of their smaller scout crafts had gone missing. No signs of damage. No emergency call. It had simply stopped sending signals. The science officer explained. It vanished near the old mining belt. The place is quiet, filled with rocks and dust, but we now believe that's where the human is hiding. Varric gave a long look at the star map. A place we thought had no value is where everything began. He walked over to a quiet room and sat alone. He looked at the old records of human activity. Most were short reports, filled with numbers and theories. But one caught his eye, a human saying, "To win without a battle is the greatest strength." Varric closed the file and sat still. He now understood what this human scout was doing. He was not trying to defeat the Drevian fleet. He was trying to show them that strength could be invisible and still be greater than anything they had known. Later that cycle, another message appeared on their screen. You've seen one scout. Imagine 100. The crew went silent again, not out of fear, but realization. They had used all their tools, all their scans, all their logic, and still couldn't catch one human. Varric looked around the room. We're not losing a battle. We're being invited to learn. And far away, in the shadows of the quiet asteroid field, the human scout finally stood up. He turned off the map, closed his logs, and whispered to himself, "They are ready for the next step." A calm silence had spread across the Drevian fleet, but it was not the kind of silence they were used to. This was a thoughtful silence, filled with questions that had no quick answers. The crew moved slowly now, checking systems again and again, not because they had to, but because they were unsure of what was real anymore. Inside the command room, Commander Varric stood near the large observation window. The stars outside shone as they always had. Nothing in space had changed, but everything inside the Drevians had. He turned to Relic, his second in command. "Do you think we've seen the scout's true purpose yet?" Relic thought for a moment, then said, "I think he wants us to see something about ourselves." Varric nodded. That idea had been growing in his mind too. The human hadn't used loud actions or large tools. He had used awareness, presence, silence, and still he had made their whole fleet pause. Across the fleet, small groups of officers were now quietly studying the strange messages the human scout had sent earlier. Many of them didn't even seem like messages. They felt more like questions without a question mark. You move fast, but do you know where you're going? Does a system work if one thought can change it? Some officers started calling these thought codes. They weren't warnings, and they weren't threats. They were ideas meant to open the mind, and they were working. On one ship, a young Drevian officer began drawing maps of the human's path through their systems. It was not a straight line. It curved, paused, changed direction, like a dance, a quiet, perfect pattern that didn't make sense at first, but slowly began to show something. The human had known exactly where to go all along. He had studied them, just as they were trying to study him. Meanwhile, the scout had moved again. His hidden base was now quiet. He no longer needed the machines. They had done their job. Now it was about timing. He placed a small device on the wall. It looked like a rock, nothing more. But when he touched it gently, a soft blue circle appeared. It showed a message he had prepared days ago. He added one new line. "You have watched long enough. Now it's your turn to be seen." And with that, the device vanished into the shadows. Back on the lead Drevian ship, something unusual happened. A small projection appeared in their control room, not on the main screens, but softly, in the center of the floor. A hologram. It was the shape of a human figure, sitting calmly, with no face shown. It did not speak. It did not move. The crew gathered slowly around it. They didn't know what to do. They just watched. Then the hologram lifted its hand and pointed at the star map behind them. It highlighted one system, a place the Drevians had ignored before. It was quiet, unimportant. But then, new information filled the screen. Life, energy, structures, all hidden inside that small, forgotten system. It wasn't just a warning. It was a gift. The scout had found something important and was showing it to them. Commander Varric's eyes widened. He's not just testing us. He's helping us see what we missed. Relic stepped forward. But why would he help us? Because we've stopped chasing him, Varric answered, and started learning. In that moment, the lights in the room dimmed. The hologram gently lowered its hand and slowly faded away. No message, no goodbye, just silence again. But this time, it was a silence of respect. Far away, back in the asteroid field, the human scout stood on the edge of a small ridge. His mission was almost complete. He had not needed control. He had not needed commands. All he needed was to guide minds that were ready to think. And now, the Drevians were thinking. A gentle light flickered across the control deck of the Drevian flagship. It was the beginning of a new cycle, but no one was thinking about time anymore. The usual tasks, system checks, energy scans, fleet reports, had all become quiet, distant things. The crew wasn't afraid. They were curious, thoughtful. Something inside them had changed. Commander Varric walked through the long halls of his ship, pausing every now and then at the windows. The stars outside were the same, but his eyes saw them differently now. He felt smaller, but not in a bad way. Just aware, as if space had always been deeper than he had believed. He arrived at the observation chamber, where a group of young officers had gathered. They had placed a copy of the scout's messages on the large wall screen. The sentences glowed in soft white light. You do not need to be loud to be strong. Watch how silence shapes your thoughts. Presence is not about power. It is about being noticed without trying. These were not military words. They were not even commands. Yet they had left a mark stronger than any speech. We've been trying to lead with answers, said one of the officers. "But maybe. The scout wants us to lead with questions." Varric nodded. "And maybe the greatest sign of strength is listening." Meanwhile, the human scout had begun his final task. He stood on a floating platform made of light and dark stone, deep within the edge of the asteroid field. It was an old place, forgotten by both his people and the Drevians. But now it had purpose again. In front of him was a small device, no bigger than his hand. It held knowledge, not weapons. Records of human journeys, lessons, values, mistakes, and changes. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to share. He gently placed the device inside a clear shell and released it into space. It moved slowly, floating toward the place he had marked on the Drevian star map. He didn't expect a thank you. This was never about recognition. Back in the Drevian ship, the signal from the floating shell reached their systems. It carried no sound, no warning, just one sentence. "Truth travels quietly." Relic turned to Varric. "He's giving us a piece of his world." They activated the shell from afar. What followed was unexpected. A stream of simple recordings began to play. Images of humans building, learning, planting, listening to storms, walking on ice, drawing on walls, helping each other, solving puzzles. Some scenes were ancient, others were from deep space colonies, but all shared one thing: people growing through thought, not force. It wasn't a display of pride. It was an invitation to understand. And then, the final part of the recording played. A message, not from the scout, but from an old human leader. "When others expect you to shout, try speaking with stillness. When they look for size, offer meaning. When they reach for more, offer enough." Commander Varric closed his eyes. He felt something deep inside, something hard to explain. Not fear, not surprise. It was calmness and understanding. He turned to his crew. "We've spent cycles scanning every piece of this space, but we missed the greatest signal of all, a mind that listens before it speaks." Later that day, the Drevians sent out their first reply. Not to demand, not to question, just to respond. They didn't use many words. "We are ready to learn." Somewhere beyond the dark curve of space, the scout received the message. He looked up from his place between the rocks and stars. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. The mission wasn't over, but it was finally understood. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter now, but it wasn't the usual glow that lit the darkness. It was something else. A quiet understanding had begun to grow across the Drevian fleet. It wasn't about power or conquest. It wasn't about fear or speed. It was about something deeper, something that the Drevians had only begun to recognize. Commander Varric sat in his private quarters, staring at the star map in front of him. He had been looking at it for hours. The map was the same as before, filled with systems and routes. But now it felt different. The lines of red, blue, and green didn't seem as important. What mattered was the space in between, those empty gaps between the systems where everything was still unknown. He stood up and walked to the observation window. His gaze went beyond the stars, beyond the map, to the endless, quiet void. It was vast, yet now it felt welcoming. "It's like learning to listen," he muttered to himself. Relic stepped into the room, sensing his commander's thoughts. "Commander, the fleet is waiting for your orders." Varric turned slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about our last message. We are ready to learn." He paused, his voice softer now. "Maybe that's all we need to do. Learn." Relic frowned slightly. "But how do we learn from the humans? They've shown us so much already." Varric smiled gently. "Exactly. They didn't teach us with strength. They taught us with silence, with questions. They've shown us that we don't always need to act first. We need to think first." Outside, the Drevians' once mighty fleet now seemed quieter. The ships floated in a pattern, together, but each with its own path, moving forward, not to conquer but to understand. The scout, hidden in the asteroid field, had finished his task. He hadn't needed to do much. His messages, his small hints, his silence, each had been enough to spark something in the Drevians. The universe, it seemed, wasn't about battles, it was about connection. The scout had shown them that, in the gentlest of ways, the Drevians weren't ready to leave their homeworlds. They still had much to learn, and their systems needed careful planning. But now, for the first time in a long time, they felt the need to look beyond their own borders. To look at the stars, not as rivals, but as companions. Varric spoke again, his tone calm but filled with certainty. Tell the fleet to prepare, not for war, not for defense, but for something else. He paused. For a journey. Relic's eyes widened. A journey, Commander. Yes, Varric replied. We will go to the system that the human pointed out. We will explore, not to take, but to understand. We will find what he saw, and more. Meanwhile, far from the Drevian fleet, the human scout stood on a quiet rock in space, far from the ships, far from all the noise of the universe. He had done his part. And now, it was time to let things unfold. He closed his eyes and breathed in the cold, silent air of space. He didn't need to hear the Drevians' reply to know they had changed. It wasn't about changing everything at once. It was about making space for change to happen, to give people the chance to grow into something greater than they had been. And that was enough. The scout looked up at the stars one last time, knowing he had left a seed. He didn't wait for answers. The journey ahead, for both humans and Drevians, was not about answers. It was about discovery. He turned, ready to return to his people. But this time, his heart was light. He had seen a world that didn't need to be saved. It just needed to be shown the way. And somewhere out there, the Drevians were taking their first steps in the same direction. And with that, the story came to its end, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet understanding between two peoples in the vast and endless universe. They had learned that strength was not about force, but about knowing when to listen, when to pause, and when to move forward together.